Kimberly, thank you. All right, do we want to do, I'm going to call the meeting to order of the Finance and Risk Management Subcommittee of San Diego Community Power. Kimberly, can you take roll, please?
Yes, Chair Humora,
Here.
Director LaCava,
Here.
Director Dedina.
Dedina here.
We have a quorum.
Thank you very much. Is there any public comment for non-agenda items?
We have no public comments.
Thank you. And does staff wish to change or withdraw any items on the agenda?
Not that I'm aware of.
Thank you. Then we'll proceed to item 5. Dr. Washington.
Thank you, Chair. Again, good evening, directors, and again, welcome, Director LaCava, to the Finance and Risk Management Committee. I am Eric Washington, Chief Financial Officer, San Diego Community Power, and I am presenting item number 5, the Treasurer's Report for the period ending 1/31/2022. Advance the slide, Kimberly, please. So I'd like to frame the Treasurer's Report in terms of the recent amended budget and the updated pro forma as a result of the rate increase that was approved for the board back in January. Overall, the changes in the comparison analysis in the Treasury Report, when we look at the results versus the amended budget, as well as the results compared to the recalibrated projections, pretty much frame the, I apologize, but my computer just blinked on me.
Oh.
Technological challenges. I'm sorry. I'll get through this. So those items I just wanted to highlight to sort of frame the Treasurer's Report. So we ended the period pretty much in line with the amended budget, with the operating revenues slightly lower than the amended projection. The anticipation is that those will kind of catch up as we go forward with the amended budget in place. Operating revenues, for the most part, were in line with the amended budget. The results for the period ending 1/31/22, we ended the period with $208 million in net operating revenues, with total operating expenses of just under $200 million, with a significant portion of that, of course, being centered in energy costs, landing at a net position of about $8.4 million. Next slide, Kimberly. Oh, I'm sorry. Yeah, there we go. Yeah, and as I previously mentioned, the comparison to the pro forma, we did recalibrate the pro forma, and as you can see, the results for the most part are in line with that pro forma, and the new pro forma, or the recalibrated pro forma, I should say, are reflective of the rate increases as well as the anticipated increased energy costs. The total expenses were about $1.6 million over, and again, that was pretty much centered in the energy costs after recalibrating the pro forma. Changes in the net position came in $2.3 million under the pro forma. And again, the pro forma changes from time to time as we continue to refine and recalibrate it. So once that's recalibrated and we start seeing the results from the actual rate increase in terms of revenue, we should see that continue to sort of map up and continue in line with actual versus projected results. So that concludes my presentation of the Treasurer's Report. I'll give it back over to you, Chair.
Thank you, Dr. Washington. Are there any questions for Dr. Washington? I'm seeing heads shaking no. This is a receive and file. Consider the report received and filed. Thank you.
You're welcome, Chair.
Next item is item 6, proposed renewal and increase to River City Bank Credit Facility.
Yes, thanks, Chair. I'll be presenting this item as well. Next slide, Kimberly. The intent here is to preview the renewal and the increase in the line of credit that we're actually working with River City Bank on. We're increasing our existing credit facility by $15 million from $35 million to a committed amount of $50 million with River City Bank. The loan type will be, as it is now, a commercial revolving line of credit for the purposes of providing working capital. As we expect, as well as some unexpected changes in energy costs or revenue, the line of credit would give us the fiscal capacity to absorb those changes ideally. So therein lies 4% increase. And just as an aside, that line of credit would also support issuances of letters of credit that would be posted in lieu of collateral being dollars. So that features will continue to be included in the commercial revolving line of credit. In terms of interest rate, so the LIBOR rate where the line of credit is currently priced to from an index standpoint is for the most part going away, and it'll be re-indexed to the secured overnight financing rate, which replaces the LIBOR rate. But from an overall pricing standpoint, it's pretty much in line with the way the credit facilities priced now in terms of interest rate. So that will be the new index, and the expectation is that the interest rate on the line of credit, even at the increased amount, will pretty much follow what it's been historically, of course, subject to changes in that index rate, plus a 2.25% spread over that index rate. The interest rates, the line of credit also has a term out feature, and should we elect to term out the outstanding balance at the time of maturity, we would reprice it at a fixed rate based on the 5-year treasury plus a spread over that. In terms of repayment for the line of credit, it's interest only until the line of credit matures. So we are seeking a 2-year extension or renewal of the line of credit, which would take us out to 2024. If the term feature is elected, then the portion that's termed out would be over a 5-year period at principal plus interest, and it would be fully amortizing. With respect to the letters of credits that are issued, if we issue a letter of credit and that letter of credit is drawn down on, the line would support the payout, but we would have to repay that portion of the line of credit within 3 business days. So that would come from either reserves or just cash on hand. And that concludes this item, my presentation of this item, Chair. So I'll turn it back over to you.
Thank you. Are there any comments or questions? Mayor Dedina.
Yeah, I'm not going to, thank you for explaining all the terms and what we're doing. I just have another question that I feel like I've asked, but maybe I'm wrong. Just explain why we're working with a Sacramento bank. I'm assuming it's because they're involved in this industry. Is that correct? Or
yeah, that's correct, Mayor Dedina. They are considered, pretty much one of the leading banks in this industry, specific to CCAs. And we've had a relationship with River City Bank dating back to, I guess, from the very beginning. I believe the existing line of credit it's been in place since May of, or actually maybe March or April of 2021, as I understand it.
Yeah,
okay.
One of the first things we did was reach out to financial institutions and look for those that were willing to support us in the front end. I think we had maybe 3 proposals in the beginning, and River City was the most responsive, and they've done this before. And so we've been with them ever since.
Okay, thanks.
And then
Thanks,
Chair,
Please.
just being new, the reason for requesting I know we're kind of still in startup phase, is that we've reached a greater level of maturity and operation where they're comfortable increasing the line of credit, or do we just see a greater need for that line?
Yes, Director LaCava. So 2 things. One, yes, they are comfortable with increasing the commitment amount. And two, we just want to make sure that we have the fiscal capacity to really weather any unexpected or expected increases in energy costs, which we've seen that was discussed during the rate increase discussion, as you might recall from January, as well as just to make sure we've got that extra cushion just to get us through the lower periods. So.
Okay, great. Thank you. And thank you for the presentation. Very detailed. Very much appreciated.
Welcome. Thank you.
Do you need any action by the committee?
No, Chair, no action required. Again, I just wanted to preface to preview this line of credit to the committee. The expectation would be we would go before the board for the formal approval at the March Board of Directors meeting.
Well, what's the policy on that? Because I guess because we do approve some things. Would it be better to have the I'm just asking again, just in terms of policy and how our own council works, to have the subcommittee approve that, or does that help at all? I'm just want to make sure I'm clear on that. Greg, what's a policy generally?
Yeah, I don't know the answer to that. I mean, that's a good question as to what's underneath our purview and not.
Right.
So this is, we haven't seen something like this before, so I don't know the answer to that.
Yeah, so I see Ryan. I thought Ryan Barron was on with us, but it looks like he may have dropped. My understanding
I'm
is
here.
that. Oh yeah, Ryan, can you answer that question with regard to Mayor Dedina's question in terms of policy and protocol? My understanding is that this subcommittee would not approve, but would recommend
Okay.
to the board. Is that correct?
Yeah. Yeah, you are an advisory committee to the board,
I get it,
although
okay.
you are board members. So you could make a recommendation that we could put in the staff report, and then a copy of the agreement would go before the board for approval with these terms that Dr. Washington is negotiating.
I'm willing to make a motion. I don't know. We also chair meetings, but I'd like to have clear, what clear the process or methodology, protocol is. So for us, and then, the board gets it and they can say, oh yeah, the committee and finance committee, reviewed this, or some finance committee reviewed this and recommended it or something. I don't know, my colleagues on the board, I don't know what you think.
I agree with that. I think it gives us a little bit of more formality and process. And if it's going to the board with our recommendation, then it means what it means, but hopefully it means something. So,
Joe, any feedback? Right?
No, I would agree that to make a recommendation, if we're comfortable with that based on the presentation, is a good thing for the committee to do. I like that structure as well, Serge. So.
You want to make Greg or Joe, you want to make the recommendation? I want to make sure I'm always the one that's not good at doing that in terms of the actual words to use. I'm sorry, it's my weakness as an elected official. Anybody want to take a stab at that? If you guys want to.
I'll make a motion to recommend approval of the proposed credit line increase to the full board of San Diego Community Power.
Joe, do you want to do your first?
I'll second.
Okay. All right.
Thank you, Serge, for that opportunity.
We
had to do that at our city council meeting last. It was our first time we've actually met at a real council meeting, and I had two members that hadn't done that in live before, so it was very nice. Anyway, I know you're way more experienced. So anyway,
there's a motion and a second. I'll call for the vote.
Director Dedina, how do you vote?
Yes. Yes.
Director LaCava, how do you vote?
Yes.
Chair Humora, how do you vote?
Aye.
Motion passes with all directors voting yes.
Well
Thanks,
done.
guys. Just for me, I'm always doing that at our city council. I'm sure all of us do that. It's just to make sure we're clear on the protocol for this, so it's consistent, so people feel like, there's a consistent policy. So if new people come on, then they understand what the protocol policy is.
Thank you, Mayor. I appreciate it. Item 7 is energy proposal evaluation criteria.
Yes, good afternoon, directors. Can you all hear me? Okay, I've had some tech issues, with my headset. Glad to hear. Thank you. So Byron Fosberg, Director of Power Services here. Before we jump in, I'll set the groundwork here as well for what we're asking you for today and what we're doing. But we're working in the process of formalizing our evaluation criteria for energy projects, kind of wholesale energy projects that we new build large scale projects we go out for RFOs and RFPs. We have a working kind of interim evaluation criteria that we're using now, but would like to kind of formalize that through your review and with the board as well. So we're also working with the CAC and other industry groups as well to kind of get stakeholder feedback and kind of bring together a community approved process as well. But want to include you all in that. So there are a number of different aspects, I guess, within this criteria. I'm happy to review them all with you today, but assume this committee, for purposes of review before the board, would be most focused on the kind of the quantitative side on the finance and then the risk side. So happy to take feedback from you all, and if you do support and want to recommend moving forward with this proposal, but again, with any changes I'll recommend to the board, would appreciate that at the end. But again, happy to preview it with you, take feedback, and then discuss as appropriate. Next slide, please, Kimberly. Thank you. So high level, we have an evaluation criteria currently, as I mentioned, that's kind of an interim one. It looks really similar to this. So what we're really, not really proposing many changes here. We reviewed this evaluation criteria previously with the ad hoc contracts committee. So I believe a couple of you may have previously seen some of these summaries and some of these evaluations that we've done in the past. We're not looking to really propose many changes, maybe some tweaks, but really to formalize and then have board blessing formally of the criteria we use to evaluate these projects as they come in. So the goal for this is the objective here is to have an evaluation criteria that we use formally for all wholesale, large scale, long-term contracts. Obviously, anything longer than a 3-year contract comes to the board. We will be doing a lot of prospective contracting here for 10-year agreements and longer, for new renewable projects. So those are really the kinds of things we're looking for to have thorough, formal review, robust review, with the board, but also through this evaluation criteria. We also see this just as generally confirming, I think, our broad objectives and kind of guidelines that we have for resource procurement in general. We won't necessarily use this evaluation criteria for every short-term contract for a month here or there, but broadly to at least denote what our priorities are and to guide resource procurement along those lines as well. So what we have here is a framework with these 6 areas. We'll get into them in a minute. They may be modified here and there, solicitation by solicitation, based on what we're looking for. But again, broadly, it's the framework we're looking to adapt or to adopt, and then we can adapt going forward. So the six areas are location, quantitative value, the project development, kind of a development risk area, community benefits, workforce development, and then environmental stewardship. So I'm happy to cover as much or as little of each of the 6 with you all here as you want today. My guess is that the kind of the quantitative value and project development, to the extent it's related to risk, will be of most kind of utmost importance, and happy to review them more broadly and the rest of them with the board as well. But if you'd like to kind of dive more in detail here, I'm happy to do so as well. So next slide, please, Kimberly. And I'll walk through each of these, but feel free to speed me up or slow me down as you all see fit. Project location, we've maintained this pretty similar to our preferences in our local request for information that we released last fall for new projects. Again, high priority for us is obviously in the San Diego area, so San Diego County or Imperial County for renewable energy, and then for energy storage or kind of standalone capacity resources. It's similar, but we define it slightly differently. It's resources that are eligible for San Diego local resource adequacy. So the map pretty well overlays with San Diego County, but obviously it's based on the SDG&E transmission system. So there are slight differences here and there, but broadly speaking, it's in San Diego County. Medium, so obviously not as high a priority, as local in our county or in Imperial County is Southern California generally, and then outside of that is kind of the neutral, which is the default would be somewhere in California, but outside of Southern California, and then of course low score for this would be out of state. And I should have mentioned earlier, each of these will have kind of a similar high, medium, low, maybe a high, medium, neutral, low that will score each of these in, and then at the end I'll show you we have a kind of a illustrative rubric. It's anonymized and just an example, but we'll show you kind of how we put it all together. I'm happy to take questions here or suggestions, but if not, happy to move on to Kimberly to the next slide. Great, thank you. Oh, looks like we got chopped up a little bit here in the in the formatting. But I think all the text is here. So, so quantitative value will be high, medium, low. Oh, apologies, it's all kind of slid over to one side. But on the quantitative side, the quantitative analysis will vary solicitation by solicitation. But the real goal here is to assign kind of high, medium, low, and really to rank each project in the term or the calculation we use will vary based on solicitation. If we're just going out for renewable energy, it'll look like for one thing. If we're going out for capacity or RA, it'll be slightly different, but usually it's kind of a net market value is our standard calculation, which is kind of how does this project compare to what we expect the market to be over the term, kind of in some ways a comparison to budget or a comparison to expected costs. If we're doing well, hopefully it'll be under, it'll be positive or positive value to us or negative cost compared to net market. If resources are scarce, it may be higher, but we'll usually kind of compare and try to do an apples to apples comparison for all resources or all proposals on a net market value comparison. So again, that takes into consideration the contract price, obviously the price of the proposal, but nets out obviously the value we may receive, whether it's in capacity, whether it's in market revenues, and kind of all the quantitative calculations that go into the impact to the bottom line to the budget that we receive. So that'll usually be one number there in the market value and net market value, and then also impact to our portfolio risk we'll usually factor in there as well, right? So if it's a just kind of if we're reducing our market risk versus some depending on the pricing structure, some of these reduce our market risk, some of these are kind of market risk neutral, which aren't increasing risk, but they don't help reduce risk as well. So they will usually layer on kind of those two calculations as we do that. So the thought here, once we're able to quantify, we'll rank kind of low to high, and then usually kind of break out into, I guess I would say quartiles, but I'm not sure what the right word is if there are only 3 of them, but for high, medium, low to 3 different categories to score that way. Usually we can break out the numbers as well, so you can see numbers 1 through 10 and 11 through 20, but kind of the groupings usually are pretty clear and are a helpful way to help review as well. So I'm happy to take questions there or move on. If no questions, Kimberly, next slide, please. There we go. The formatting, full screen again. Thank you. So the project development here, kind of similar to what we do on the quantitative side. Probably less, not quite as easy to have a rank for each project, but again, usually quite easy to go high, medium, low based on a number of different criteria and factors. Obviously, they will vary based on solicitation. If we're going out for just kind of standard products, solar plus storage, wind, those are all relatively straightforward, and for the most part, we should expect, for resources to be relatively low risk, and we should expect to be able to work with, low risk developers and high viability projects. If they are more long lead time resources, we've got some mandates now coming down from the state for long duration storage, for example, for geothermal energy that are projected to be farther out in the future. Those we kind of tend to be what we would expect to be a little riskier, so to speak, from a project development standpoint. So based on the solicitation, we'll kind of set the criteria, but within each one, we'll again have high, medium, low, and this is kind of the standard factors we use here are site control, interconnection status. Have the developers been, kind of taking steps and kind of taking prudent action to secure certainty along the lines? Obviously, have they done their permitting and environmental screens, and then all the financing, and then broadly developer experience and kind of the experience within the development team as well. So put all those together, and we'll assign then kind of a high, medium, or low score for development. Next slide, please, Kimberly. Thank you. So community benefits, again, feels in some ways kind of outside the FRMC, but I'm happy to review with you all as well. We've already reviewed with the CAC, and I expect this to be, obviously high priority for the board. So happy to take any feedback that you all have here. I'm just not sure if it fits within FRMC specifically, but I know it is very important. So we do have kind of a similar, high, medium, neutral, low here as well. And high, obviously, is that it's within a a disadvantaged community and has completed community outreach and demonstrates community benefits. So I will note that we're working with the CAC now as well to try to really hone our definitions around these communities and community benefits. So I know there are very strict Cal Enviro screen definitions around what a DAC is. We're considering whether we want to kind of broaden that to have kind of an SDCP, specific, preferred community, right, for development, instead of just specifically the Cal Enviro screen. And then the CSE suggested a couple other factors we may want to incorporate there as well. So certainly open to their feedback and your feedback as well as you have that. But we may kind of tweak that definition. We may define DAC a little differently if there are areas we identify within the region that where we really do want to focus development. And then I'll note as well that community benefits, again, are pretty broad term. What we'd like to do is really have a kind of almost like a pre-approved vendor list, but a pre-approved community benefits list where we can have suggestions, right, for a lot of these developers, and really have ways for them to show that value and really point them in the right direction. A lot of them are, some of them are local, a lot of them ideally are locally based, but those that aren't, who don't know the area as well, we'd love to say, hey, here's what we're looking for. Here's how we want you to engage with the communities or contribute to our communities. So, here are areas you can do that. Director Didier, I saw a hand up.
Well, yeah, I mean, as someone who works in the environmental field, there's two ways of looking at this. So I want to understand the logic, because historically, one of the biggest environmental justice issues in this country, and it still is placing energy, facilities in low-income, communities that become polluted. So our logic, I want to understand the logic here. Our logic, because in 5 years, you may people say, oh well, the green energy industry only puts its projects in low-income disadvantaged communities and not Palm Springs. So, that can go both ways. So maybe I wasn't here when we made that decision, but maybe I can understand the reasoning. If it's employment, that's fine. But, you could, we're seeing this issue come up in East County right now. And so I want to make sure, and I could see folks in the community saying, see, they target communities like ours and not wealthy communities. So
yeah, no, I completely appreciate the question, and yeah, there's a lot of nuance here, right? I think in how we do this, I think primarily, citing these resources, especially clean energy resources, primarily, I think in communities of concern or in in DACs formally, part of that has been to reduce reliance on in those local areas on dirtier fossil resources, right? To kind of clean the local air in those areas. So I think that's kind of one of those primary objectives. I think in addition to that, to your point, local hire, and we'll get to workforce benefits in a minute. But I think there's a marriage there between the two, right? If you really can source your development and you're in the same area where you're also doing hiring and supporting the local economy in those areas without kind of just doing it and commuting it from elsewhere. I think that's really the goal. And I want to also call out here that completing community outreach as well is key to this high priority as well. So it's not just the location being in one spot, but really to building consensus within your community as well, and incorporate in working with the community, right, in collaboration to make sure.
Look, I get it, and I'm gonna push on this because I think
sure, please do.
And not just in general. I think it's a legitimate board issue, and maybe we go back to the community advisory committee. And the only reason I say that is because I think we all got caught, in Campo but where again it was flipped on its head, right? It's a low income, some level disadvantaged community, and it was just strictly land use impacts. All those other ancillary or direct benefits were not counted, in the sense that the only thing that mattered to the community was community character, et cetera. So, and this is playing out, in terms of development issues all across the state and all across the country. So I think we have to be cognizant of that, because, we think internally that something makes sense logically because of certain criteria, but then all of a sudden a community comes off and then throws that same criteria back at us. So, I think, and this is going to become an issue more and more, right? And the issue of class and privilege, and who gets these projects is going to play out, and it already is, right? So anyway, that's all.
Yeah, no, I appreciate that, Director Didion, and fully agree. And, you know, I think this, in some ways, this has been, to your point, a standard way historically of looking at things. It may not be the right way of doing it going forward, right? We're working now on the DAC GT program. I'm sure you've heard about that at some point. I know Sebastian, is kind of leading that effort as well. And that's been based purely on citing, right? So that's kind of been the historical way. I think we're trying to, if that is our criterion, to make sure we incorporate the community outreach and direct community benefits as well. But I'm happy to take more feedback from you all and have more of a conversation around that. So thank you.
You know, it's going to play out in the desert where you have wealthy, you know, you have extremely wealthy communities, north of Cathedral City. And then, you know, you look at the solar projects south of there or whatever, or in certain areas, and it's clear that, you know, if there's siting criteria, it's not going to be around golf courses and high income country clubs. So, you know, and that's an issue we're going to have to deal with, right? And I think, again, I'm just going to say this: I think all of us who approved the project in Campo, right, and you know, we're again, I think, all surprised when the community opposition surfaced, and it's not, wealthy residents, and it's not a wealthy area or privileged area. So again, we need to be. This is one of those things that is going to come up.
Yep,
we're going to have to grapple with. So I hope we have a more robust discussion at the board level, or we go back to if the community advisory committee decides that this is great criteria, but I'm sure that other board members will look at this and be a little concerned based on what we just went through.
Sure, no, completely understand. And I may even suggest, again, we can follow up, but may suggest that we have, so in kind of the same way I suggested pre-approved community benefits, right? If we define it differently, instead of this kind of just strictly EnviroScreen DAC, if we really kind of go to an SDCP, encouraged development zone or something, we could be more mindful and more careful maybe about.
I think that's the key. It's really, what is the community benefit? And so I think that's something, right? If that's, why is that the number one criteria? So anyway, I don't know if my fellow colleagues on the board want to weigh in, but again, I'm just, trying to think about, how we all, it was something we all grapple with, right? Like in government service, right? In development. So anyway.
Yeah. Well, I'll jump in quickly because, as Serge mentioned, it's probably a little bit far afield from this committee's purview.
Right.
But I appreciate where Serge is coming from. I represent District 1 here in the city of San Diego, probably one of the wealthier districts. And it's like, we would welcome affordable housing, but nobody can afford the land to be able to make a project pencil. And so you get that same thing when you have these large scale. And I'm learning as a new board member about the value of a large scale project that will create, efficiencies in terms of delivering renewable power, as opposed to taking advantage of what I know some people are going to advocate for, which is really trying to encourage private property owners to build excess solar capacity that we can then accumulate and have battery storage that would achieve the same goal in an incremental way and may have less of a negative impact on those communities, or frankly, any community. Those are just as good candidates in the warehouses in Otay Mesa as they are in up here in UTC area, right? Where you got big roof areas. But it's a more of a challenge for for community power about how to navigate that space. But I'll second what Serge said. It is part of it, and I think it's what makes this work just a little bit harder, because it's a lot easier. We're just going for profits. We don't care about anything else. We can go for the profit. We're not doing that. That's off the table, really. We have to make things pencil and balance, of course. But I think it is going to be an interesting challenge. And, Byron, what you said at the beginning, so many of these responses are probably going to be apples and oranges. And how do you try to piece them together and to make an effective decision? So I appreciate you got to create some kind of framework to start the conversation. And then ultimately it's a recommendation and a board decision about, do we agree with the factors that were used and stuff. So
I'll take your comment, Joe, about it's really not our purview. So anyway, with that, I'm trying to move on. I'm a social scientist, so this is the kind of, and geographer, this kind of stuff.
Well, I'm the chair of the environment committee here at the city, so
yeah, right. No, I mean, that's all we think about, right? Is citing and anyway, I'm fine to move on.
Well, I appreciate all the conversation here and consider this then a free preview for the board discussion in a couple of weeks. Again, we'll continue to work with with the CSE as well and have some of those discussions around how some of this how we can more clearly define, I think, both the location specific benefits and community benefits themselves.
Well, yeah, and I think all of us are learning, and we all know that every assumption we hold about something gets turned on its head, right? It's actually the opposite. We come up with parameters, and all of a sudden we're all surprised that the opposite happened, the opposite reaction happened that we didn't. And I think that's what happened and not unexpectedly. And people have a right to be concerned about what happens in the neighborhood. So anyway, that's all. I think
Sure.
the assumptions, and then we don't want to be surprised. There may be a better way to frame it, but again, that's a discussion for the board and community advisory committee, or maybe not. So I'll move on.
That sounds good. And again, appreciate all the discussion. So high level again here, it's high, medium, neutral, low, as you can see outlined. Kimberly, next slide, please. Workforce development. So again, similar, happy to kind of preview this and take it at whatever depth you'll like. So we do have, our SDCP already, has our own board approved inclusive and sustainable workforce policy. So, again, that's pretty easy to say high, it's going to meet all the objectives that we encourage with that policy. Medium is that, and I've got the policy on the next slide, so, so we can refer to it in a minute, but the sustainable workforce policy, if it doesn't meet all of those, but does still meet prevailing wage, skilled and trained workforce, and then local hire commitments, it can be kind of a medium on this scale, and then low, doesn't meet, all the encouraged factors in the policy, or those that fall in the medium category. So Kimberly, if you want, we can go to the next slide just to review the inclusive and sustainable workforce policy. So again, you can see it here. Again, and this can be a free preview if you like for the board meeting, or we can go more in depth if you prefer. But again, encourage local hire, properly licensed contractors and electricians, local apprentices, prevailing wage, job posters, workers' compensation, and then California state approved apprenticeship programs. So that's broadly the policy. If it meets all of those, then they'll get a high. If it's just that subset I mentioned earlier, it'll be a medium. So happy to take questions or comments there, or if you'd like to think about that for a couple of weeks, we can we can circle back during the board meeting. Great. Next slide, please, Kimberly. So environmental stewardship is one that, again, I'll preview it here and take any comments you have as well. But the tweak here that I always need to catch myself on, or was a little counterintuitive to me the first time, was that this is environmental stewardship beyond just being renewable energy. So I think kind of the table stakes, so to speak, are, yeah, we're gonna be signing, renewable deals, clean storage deals, wind, solar storage, whatever, wind. So that's kind of that gets you a neutral, right? If you want to go farther above it to get a medium or high, you need to have additional environmental benefits on top of that. So it's not, again, not required that the resources do this, but if they are able to demonstrate that they have additional benefits, then certainly we're able to score higher. So certainly environmental remediation, or being in a brownfield site versus a greenfield, there are a lot of water, I guess, low water usage in development, and also over life of the resource benefits as well that we see a lot of developers try to employ. So want to be able to kind of give a space to allow credit for those as well. Happy to take questions there if you have any, or again, just consider this a preview. All right, next slide, please, Kimberly. So I think that's kind of the summary of the 6 different criteria, and this is just for your for your edification, kind of a way to walk through how we typically score these. So again, all the projects and counties and price and everything are made up, but just to show you how we would typically do this. And those of you, Director Moore, I think you've sat on an ad hoc contracts committee with us, so this probably looks familiar. But it's not a formal rubric with formal weighting, but certainly as you highlight the highs and mediums and the lows, because there are so many different Director LaCava, to your point, apples and oranges and bananas in there. It's really tough to score, which is the best fruit, so to speak. So it is really a matter of taking them all, at a more holistic glance to really see, which rise to the top. And this is similar to a few that we've seen in the past. There are usually a couple of projects that stand out pretty clearly that are all highs, maybe a couple of mediums, and then a few that sink down pretty low. So this is, again, has been our kind of evaluation methodology to date. So, happy to take feedback on that as well, but hopefully this helps just to see how we'd employ this kind of rubric.
So just my dumb question, maybe you already mentioned this, and you don't sign score, like a number score, or do you? So like, it's just easy to look at the end and go, oh, it's a 5 or a 3 or whatever, or do you guys do that?
We haven't, again, within the price and value category, we'll assign a rank, usually kind of 1 through 30 or whatever it is, right? Because that's, you can boil it down just to one score. I found historically, and then kind of in discussing it, internally, we frequently can get so wrapped up around, is this a 4 or a 5, or is this a 7 or an 8? And is this category 15% or is it 10% or 12? That you spend so much time kind of working on those weighted items that it doesn't actually necessarily add that much value, or any, and sometimes you end up with kind of unintended consequences. So it can be better to score across the board here, in this way, really weigh the pros and the cons of each one independently. And once you get to this, we may have 30 projects tossed in. Once you get to the top 8, you can really look at each one and kind of, I don't know, I'd say more feel them, get a feel for each one and really look at it more holistically than just really reducing to one score.
Okay.
There are a lot of people that would completely, the whole Moneyball sort of aspect of very hyper quantitative analysis would just, I'm just throwing that out there, would completely agree with you guys. So, and I understand, again, social scientists, qualitative versus quantitative. So that's fine. I get it.
And certainly appreciate that. And as I'm a big baseball and stats guy also, so completely agree. And
I just read a book about Bill Belichick and the Tom Brady and the Patriots, and whatever, and Belichick had dismissed the bean counters and said it's told, so whatever that's worth. I just, again, reading about this. So the coaches were doing the hyper statistical analysis, and he's like, guys, we didn't throw very well, but so I get it.
That's a great example.
Legitimate social science versus the more hyper quantitative sort of like analysis, right? Like what comes out and how do you rank it? So it's fine.
Yeah, no, I appreciate that, Director. And I think especially we will be very thorough in this kind of the price and value, the quantitative part of it, right? There will be a lot of analysis against, all kinds of regressions and market forward pricing and kind of all of these analyses that will come down to, that'll be very quantitative. But a lot of these others, obviously, as we've talked about, right? It's harder to be quite as quantitative. So into the sports analogy, right? In some ways, there's an eye test to that as well that isn't sufficient in and of itself, but the numbers plus the eye test in some ways really help you come to a full assessment.
Okay. And then to kind of build on Serge and Byron's your kind of explanation. So you threw up this chart here. So do those characteristics kind of is part of the screening process and like, okay, we've got top 4, they're all pretty good and solid, and now we're going to really go in there and negotiate and see where we can get the best deal? Or do you say, hey, let's start with the 200 megawatt project because that's that solves a lot of our needs? Or where would you take it from here, I guess?
Yeah, that's a great question, Director LaCava. And to date, what we've done, I don't think we've ever kind of screened out based on size to date. It really has been kind of, any and all projects. And so to, depending on, it probably would to be frank, we've had a lot of buying to do as well, right? So it hasn't been like, oh, we only need 30 megawatts, so 100, 250, 20, one of them gets the job done. But we usually from this example, we take maybe, these 8 projects, we'd say, hey, these top 4, maybe top 3, top 5, enter negotiations, and shortlist them and try to get it into exclusive negotiations and then start drafting the paper back and forth. My preference is usually to end up with a number of projects where if you're successful, you are willing and able to contract with all of them, but not contingent or not, you don't require contracting with all of them, right? Because as soon as as soon as suppliers know that you're relying upon them, you lose a whole lot of leverage. So there's usually like N-1, N-2, kind of shortlisting to see where you can really come to terms and really get come to mutual agreement on good terms for our agency.
Yeah.
Well, you know what's going to happen though, and again, I think the issue of Campo comes up, and this criteria. At the end of the day, someone's going to do a PhD or do some, they're going to run a regression analysis and decide that, all these projects were cited for political reasons, and up to the end of the day, they didn't quantify the emissions reductions benefit enough. Like at the end of the day, when we're, because there is a big debate and discussion in the emissions reductions world that, we're not going after these targets, I guess, effectively enough, because all these other issues are in the way. I'm not saying they're not valuable. I'm just saying that for the people that are really focused on emissions reductions, they would argue that's all this stuff's great. But if it's not, if the criteria that really doesn't come up with some sort of quantitative analysis or score about, does it provide the best emissions reductions for a dollar invested, then is it a benefit? So that's all I'm throwing out there. And these are all legitimate issues that we need to just be aware of. That's all when we have these things go out in the public, right?
No, completely agree. It's a very it's the time old question for us as an agency, for the CCA movement especially, right? If we're purely environmentally focused, to your point, is it a dollars per metric ton abated? But we have other missions here too, right? We want to bring local jobs and local development and all that as well. So it's really in some ways, is 1 megawatt in San Diego County worth 1 megawatt in I don't know, in the Central Valley or in New Mexico, right? How do you kind of compare the benefits of all those? So this is really the crux of that, and it is really hard to boil down to just one quantitative number, which I think the value of being able to simplify at least to this degree in a matrix, and then really discuss as we discussed with the ad hoc conduct committee and then with the board as well, just to really review and make sure we're taking it all in consideration.
Well, look, we don't have to do this now, but again, we have to be able to, and there's always those elements, right? We need to maybe look at that and think, maybe it's next year we start thinking about, and when you get a postdoc or a PhD student to look at this, but what is that criteria? So it's the quantitative value would be whatever money we're investing versus the emissions reductions output. I'm not obviously not an economist or an energy expert, but so we have that score in mind. So then, board members like me would say, look, I get all this stuff's important, but the climate crisis is accelerating. And so, is this score that we've purely based on emissions and investment cost or whatever, is that work out on this, right? And anyway, it's just something to think about if that makes sense, right? Like, just because ultimately that is our mission, is to really, address emissions in addition to all this other stuff.
Yeah,
sure.
It's something to think about.
No, completely agree and appreciate the comment.
So is that a seventh criteria that we could actually build in at this stage, or is that just harder to quantify?
Yeah,
the emission reduction versus dollars. I mean, it's like you said, you're looking at that versus all the other criteria, the more social aspects that we're also trying to achieve.
We certainly can. I think our let's see, for so many reasons, I think we tend to think of renewable energy, whether I guess solar versus wind or solar with solar and storage combined together pretty equivalently, because they're all carbon-free renewable energy. But to your point, maybe this could be the next version would be to really do a more thorough emissions reduction score. Based on the different profiles. And then if we do want to work in, again, geothermal has slight emissions or other technologies, we could factor that in as well. But so I think we.
Yeah, I'm showing my ignorance, or maybe it's an efficiency, whatever the criteria is, so that it shows the benefit, right? Like, I guess just the numerical, carbon benefit. So again, sorry for showing my ignorance. I'm just trying to think about this.
Yeah.
Right? That's all.
No,
I was just going to say that I think it is worth putting out there, because like you said, there is an accountability that I think the CCAs bring that the ISOs don't. And because sometimes you're going to make that hard decision that says we need to lock in, X capacity to meet, when we roll out to this huge constituency. Whereas some of the other things that might be more desirable is like, yeah, that's going to take time and we'll get there eventually, but we got a demand now that we got to respond to. And so I don't know. I think it's an interesting discussion, Serge. Thank you.
Yeah, I agree. I appreciate it. I like the suggestion, and we'll see. We'll kind of huddle up and see if there's a way to, this time around. I'm not sure, but beyond maybe incorporating something in kind of the economic, evaluation should be easy enough to put a, factor in the cost of carbon or social cost of carbon, right? We can always do something like that as well. Or beyond that, we happy to discuss more.
And I know, I'm sorry, I'm going to say it. The climate policy nerds, number crunchers that work for this organization, I'm assuming that you guys think about this stuff I know you do, right? And we all do. And these are legitimate debates that we're all having, right? I work in the conservation field. We're trying to look at how to do emissions reductions through natural climate solutions. At the end of the day, it's how many carbon, kilos of carbon are you sequestering or whatever. So anyway.
100%, and that's why we're here.
Right. And so that's all. It's just good to have a response to the folks in our community that we have to answer to, the guys with multiple PhDs that, doing postdocs at Scripps or whatever at MIT that did their PhDs on this stuff, that say, hey guys, you're kind of blowing it, right? You could be a little bit more hyper efficiency because someone at Scripps is going to do work on that. And then we're going to be like,
send them our way, please. Happy to have that conversation.
Yeah. Okay. Anyway.
Yeah. Appreciate it. Well, that's the I guess the summary that we'll be bringing, again, still socializing and then tweaking a little bit as we build consensus here, but appreciate any feedback you have. If there's a motion you'd like to make to recommend portions of this or all of it to the board, I'm happy to take that away as well. Or if not, we can bring it back to the board with any feedback you have.
Committee's pleasure. Do you want to recommend the criteria with the revisit on the community benefits and then potentially emissions reductions, adding it into it as well?
Is emissions reductions the right term, Byron, or is there a better term?
Something in the environmental that quantifies the benefits of the environment.
Yeah, I think, and I'll have to maybe think of this a little and get back to you, but I think, because I mentioned when we talked to the environmental section, right, kind of table stakes are just being renewable energy and getting in the door. But I do think there's an important distinction kind of that we've drawn here that is really what's our best bang for our buck in carbon reduction, right? And this came up, I think, when we talked about the feed-in tariff as well, right? We have new pricing price structure. We're trying to encourage the feed-in tariff to incorporate solar plus storage, right? Not just rooftop solar at noon when it's pretty solar anyway. Like we've done a lot of work as an industry to decarbonize the middle of the day. So we've kind of sent price signals trying to encourage people to use solar plus storage into the evening so we can decarbonize the evening as well. So there's something we can do there. I'll have to see, but I think there's definitely kind of a cost of abated emissions or cost of emissions reduction that we can incorporate certainly as a factor in this as well.
So
yeah, look, it's right, and it's only an added benefit, right? It makes us look good, and it's just helpful, right? And it answers that question that someone's going to ask. So yeah, thanks, I appreciate it. So I'm willing to recommend it. I think whatever we can do to, I don't make everything worse for everybody, but anyway, so.
And ask staff to come up with some criteria that could be applied uniformly across the different energy sources, which is a little bit of work to do, but that's why we have expert staff.
Yeah, we'll see what we can do to quantify that, but I'm sure we can come up with something, to quantify emissions reductions and cost effectiveness, as we discussed.
Look, my goal is to have the best CCA in the world, right? So, no, seriously.
Check.
Our goal. Our goal
what's next?
The best, most I would say the word CCA and the most innovative, right? That's thinking about how to do this stuff more than anyone else. So, let's get used to it.
I like it. I agree, and that challenge accepted.
Is that part of the motion, Mayor?
The best CCA in the world, absolutely. Why not?
I will second the motion. Any further comments?
No, if we actually get enough language there for Kimberly or somebody to put that into a clear motion for the board, because I think I know I'm going to support it. I just want to make sure we can record what Greg and Serge kind of threw in there together. So,
Kimberly, are you good?
So would the motion then be to recommend approval of this evaluation criteria with an additional criteria by staff for emissions reductions?
And revisit of the community benefits criteria. I think is what we're looking for, correct?
Yeah. You know, and I'm sorry about this, but getting back to the community benefits, at the end of the day, really the criteria is community. It's like, and how does it fit? Because what you're making the assumption that it's, you know, the most benefit is disadvantaged community. But we saw recently was, you know, does it fit with it? Does it have support of the community? So that's just something for us to think about, right?
It's counterintuitive.
Yeah, right. Exactly. Yeah, that's all. You know, so we
Just
don't
put that in there, that it's counterintuitive.
Well, I like Ryan's revisit, kind of leaves the door open. We've
right.
opened
Yeah,
the
yeah, yeah.
door,
That's all.
and then we'll kind of do that. So I think the advantage of the three of us as elected officials, we know that whatever we do, someone's going to be unhappy about it. So
I know.
we have just to make our case that we've tried to do the best we can. So, but I think we got to a good place. I'm supportive of it.
Thank you, Ryan.
Absolutely.
All right, any further comments or discussion? All right, I'll call for the vote.
Director Dedina, how do you vote?
You know,
Director LaCava, how do you vote?
Yes.
Chair Humora, how do you vote?
Aye.
Motion passes with all directors voting yes.
Thank you, Byron. Good stuff.
thanks,
Thank
guys.
you all. Yeah, appreciate your time and the discussion.
Yeah, it's going to become more important
you.
as we get further into this. In the beginning, I remember going through some of this, and there weren't a whole lot of players out there, but there's going to be more, and so this is going to be the evaluation become more and more important.
Yeah, completely agree. And I think we'll appreciate having a robust discussion and a formalized approach. So thank you all.
Well, finally, this came up last night at City Council meeting, and we had a staff presentation. At the end, I was like, why did we do that? Did that actually help us? And the answer was no. It was for a project that actually is good, and the recipients of the project didn't understand it. So again, I think that's for us, is the more we have criteria and things that help us, board members and staff, as well as our constituents, understand something in a way that makes sense, that we've covered these bases, it helps us get things approved quicker. And then we get energy, we save energy, right? And the planet faster. So that's all.
Yeah.
I know you guys all think about that all the time, but anyway, it's something I just dealt with last night. So anyway.
Yeah, completely agree.
All right, that takes us to committee member announcements. Mayor Dedina, any announcements?
Yeah, we should be the best CCA in the world. That's it, flat out. Boom.
Roger
That's
that.
what I learned from reading about the Patriots and Tom Brady. Even though they had Deflategate and all their crises.
Mayor, was that a new book?
We all need, and that's the organizational development piece. So there.
Mayor, what's the name of that book?
Oh my God, I'll just send it to you. I have it on Libby on my.
I'm from Massachusetts, so I've read several of those books. So
anyway.
Councilmember LaCava, any comments?
Well, being a new member of the committee, let me apologize in advance for being blunt, but to the discussion we had with item 6, I think it would be helpful if the agenda was a little more robust, actually identify which items are for possible action, which ones are just information. And I'm going to complain about not getting material in advance so that I'm a little more prepared walking into this. So having those PowerPoints sent to us in advance would be very much appreciated. And the other thing I think about, in addition to what Serge and Greg, you both mentioned, is how much more open we are. We're a Brown Act, we're open to the public. I don't know that we got anybody from the public on this particular committee meeting, but more information in the agenda, a little more of a description is, I think, helpful and informative. I'm really impressed with our transparency that the organization's bringing. I know that we're still startup, we're still running pretty lean on staff, so I want to be sensitive to that. But to the degree that we can, make that a process would be, I think, very helpful. And then we don't have to spend time about, do we need to make a recommendation? Staff can tell us what the recommendation ought to be. That will give us a good place to start for a motion. I always appreciate that. So anyway, I'll leave it at that. Thanks a lot, Greg.
Well said. Thank you very much. And with that, I will adjourn us until April. Thank you, everyone.
Great, thank you.
Guys.